I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the Policing Cost Recovery Amendment Bill and for consideration of the Māori Purposes Bill and the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. The House and Committee for further consideration of the Policing Cost Recovery Amendment Bill and for consideration of the Māori Purposes Bill, the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Amendment Bill. Members, we turn first to the Policing Cost Recovery Bill, Cost Recovery Amendment Bill. When we were last debating this call, we were taking all provisions as a single debate. Jan Logie has the call and has 1 minute remaining. Can I see the list? Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I rise to oppose the provisions of this Police Cost Recovery Amendment Bill, and I want to turn particularly to Part 1 of the bill, Clause number 2, where it defines what a demand service is, because this allows the police to charge for what are regarded as demand services. And so Clause 2 basically says that the demand service constitutes policing. It's provided only on the request of an individual or an organisation, and it is provided to the individual or organisation requesting it and is of direct benefit to that individual or organisation, even though the provision of the service may also be of indirect benefit to the public of a whole. But it does go on, so pretty much that includes most things that police do, but then it goes on to specifically exclude the response of the police to calls for service relating to potential offending, the conduct of criminal investigations, and the prosecution of criminal offences. And the point that I want to make here is pretty much everything to do with crime prevention could be covered by that definition. So anything that doesn't involve responding directly to potential criminal offending or the prosecution or investigation thereof could be a service that the police would recover costs for. So if a school approaches the police and says, we want you to come into our school and do some crime prevention sessions with our kids, the police could charge the school for doing that. That's a basic function of the police, and this legislation would allow them to charge for doing so, because it does not fit within the exemption or the exclusion that this bill sets forth. So let's just run through that again. Would police going into school to do a crime prevention lesson constitute policing? Yes, it would. Is it provided only on the request of an individual or an organisation? Yes, it would be on the organisation, which is the school, would be requesting it. Does it benefit the organisation? Yes, it does benefit the organisation. So therefore, it's a service that is a demand service and can therefore be charged for. Would it be covered by the exclusions? Well, is it a response to a call for service relating to potential offending? No, it is not. Is it the conduct of criminal investigation? No, it is not. Is it the prosecution of criminal offences? No, it is not. So therefore, it is regarded as a demand service, but it is not covered by the exemption, therefore it could be charged for. So the question that I have is, why would the government put in place provisions that allow for police crime prevention work to be charged for if those crime prevention services are requested by an individual or an organisation? Because it seems to me that the whole emphasis of policing strategy for some time now has been around crime prevention. Much better to prevent crime before it happens rather than have to investigate and deal with it afterwards. And why would the government propose legislation that would allow for a user pays environment for all of the police's crime prevention work? Because by my reading of those provisions in this bill, that is effectively what they are doing. There are no provisions that I can see here that would suggest that a crime prevention program requested by an individual or an organisation would not be regarded as something that the police could charge for. Now, I'm not saying they would charge for it in the first instance, but why would we create a law that would allow them to do so when preventing crime, protecting the public, must be one of the core responsibilities of the New Zealand Police? So I'm strongly opposed to these particular provisions. I want to turn then to the other issue which I have particular concern about, and that is the police vetting process. And this is probably the most likely police service that we would see charges introduced for if this bill is passed through the House. And let's consider who are the types of organisations who use police vetting, and in particular organisations that deal with young people. So I want to start with early childhood centres and then move on to schools. We have some requirements in regulation for early childhood services to have all of those staff who are working with young people, children, babies even, to be police vetted before they are allowed to work in those early childhood centres. That's a government regulatory requirement, and it is a damn good one, and it is one that we should continue to uphold. What this bill would do is it will allow the police to charge for those vetting services that early childhood centres may be requesting. For private early childhood services, there is a private benefit to that, one could argue, but there are community-based services such as kindergartens who receive all of their funding from government, or they receive now a little bit of funding from parents, but predominantly their funding comes from government. So ultimately, the cost of the police vetting is going to be met by a different branch of government by cutting funding from early childhood services, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Thank you. By effectively cutting funding from early childhood services, because it is transferring the cost of a service currently provided by police onto the early childhood services without increasing the funding to early childhood services correspondingly. The same provisions apply to schools. So in the case of schools, teachers are required to undergo police vetting to renew their teacher registration requirements. Now here's an interesting one. The government, as part of a collective bargaining round, agreed to cover the teacher registration fees for teachers renewing their practising certificates. Will the government also cover the police vetting costs if the police introduce that? Because it seems to me that they find a back doorway to undo a commitment that they've made to cover the cost of teachers renewing their practising certificates. It's a very good provision that we have in our education system, that those people who are working with young people should have a police vetting certificate. I then want to turn to another issue around schooling. So I've talked about teachers. Schools will have police vetting requirements for their support staff as well. But what about those volunteers who work with young people? And there have been a couple of cases in the media recently around coaches, so parents who coach sports teams, and whether police vetting should be required there, or if a school wishes to use police vetting for positions that they don't have to vet. So in the moment they do not have to vet parents who volunteer to coach for sports teams, but they may choose to do so. Under this bill, they would be discouraged from doing so by the cost that could be imposed. And ultimately, the question then comes back to the very basis on which we fund policing in New Zealand. Is it consistent with the public interest to discourage those individuals and organisations who could benefit from using police vetting in order to protect to young people or their clients or their customers? Is it in our best interests as a society to discourage them from doing so by imposing additional charges? And my view is that there isn't. So I've put forward a supplementary order paper that would specifically exempt schools and early childhood education services from the charges for police vetting, because ultimately that's a transfer of cost onto schools and early childhood services. It is not going to improve child safety and student safety, and it is ultimately going to result, I think, in a compromising of that. So I look forward to the Minister's response to those two issues.
Mr. Chair.
The Honourable